stand up for Canadian workers. We will stand up for Canadian industries. And more Canadians will stand up for each other. This is a moment of pride. This is a moment of pulling together.
The combination of Trump tariffs and Carney-Trudeau tax hikes would be an existential disaster for the Canadian economy.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau earlier today in Paris on what could be his last trip overseas as the leader of this country has been meeting with EU allies discussing the rising tide of protectionism coming from the United States. You also heard there from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who's holding a pre-election campaign announcement yesterday in Iqaluit. So how are the two connected? Well, we've got new polling showing the gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives is narrowing. What was once a 27-point advantage for the Conservatives is now inside double digits. Have a look at these numbers. This is the latest Nanos Research federal ballot tracking, and it has the Conservatives at 38.3%. The Liberals are now at 30.1%. The NDP at 16.4%. Léger Marketing also has the Conservatives at 40% and the Liberal Party at 31%. That's two polls now showing the gap is just single digits. So how did this change so quickly? Well, one word: Trump. Respondents to the Nanos poll say that the American president and Canada's relationship with the U.S. is a growing concern. Chief data scientist and CEO of Nanos Research, Nick Nanos, told CTV News that Conservatives have been caught flat-footed on the issue of dealing with Trump. So will we see Pierre Poilievre taking a tougher stance on the U.S. president and how we deal with him? Let's bring in our front bench. Joining me today, our former New Brunswick Liberal Premier, Brian Gallant. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt. She's the Vice President and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. And CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader, Tom Mulcair. Lisa, I want to start with you on this one. Pierre Poilievre has held such a lead. So what effect do you think that these numbers are having inside the war room of the Conservative Party right now?
I don't think Pierre and his team have ever taken any poll for a real check on what's going to happen on Election Day. Let me put it this way. If you talk to anybody who is close to Pierre, or if you talk to any, I would say, MPs, when they get a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of thinking that they're going to form government, Pierre is the first one to say, hey, listen, we've got a long way to go. This is a long time. We don't even have a campaign yet going for the general election. So the polls may be what they're being, but we have to focus on Canadians, and we need to focus on our own campaign and what we're saying. I don't think that message changes given what you're seeing right now. And I guess they're planning a rally this coming Saturday that's going to kick off their renewed effort to woo Canadians.
Yeah, and something that you can maybe see, Lisa, a bit of a shift from the Conservatives, maybe not going so hard as we've sort of seen specifically on the axe the tax, but more changing that message to being a little more protectionist, do you think?
It's a good question. The funny part is that axe the tax, actually, are you claiming victory now? Because every Liberal candidate seems to have seen the light that the carbon tax is not actually a good thing. So I don't know, promise made, promise kept, even before Pierre becomes Prime Minister when it comes to the carbon tax, because even the Liberals are going to go down that path. So I don't know if they're attacking in a different direction, Mike, but I think what they are doing is looking at the reality that Canadians are facing right now. You would have to be blind not to be understanding of how nervous Canadians are and how, I would say, rattled they are with respect to what's happening with our neighbors to the south. And as a result, any good leader is going to react to that. And if it means it's going to change what they talk about first and foremost, then that's what they're going to do. You know what, it's interesting. I'm not really convinced that the poll changes that we're seeing has as much to do with Mr. Trump as it does the fact that Mr. Trudeau is no longer there.
Yeah, and Tom, one of the interesting things when you sort of dig into the numbers, especially from Nanos, that votes in Quebec are shifting back towards the Liberals, despite them not having a leader right now and having zero candidates in their leadership race from the province of Quebec.
It's a fascinating thing to see, and it proves an old adage that a month is an eternity in politics, because, you know, a month ago, I don't remember any of us on this panel or any other predicting that that gap would be narrowed down to single digits. And that's without mentioning Mark Carney, because the especially the Léger poll goes one step further and then asks the same question with Carney as leader. And across the country, Léger has it at a dead heat, an absolute tie between the two. Now, Lisa's completely right. There hasn't been an election. And again, things are changing so rapidly. It's true that Trump has had a determining effect on things, but it's also true that the twin pillars that Mr. Poilievre had been, standing on, which were Justin Trudeau's impopularity and the carbon tax, they've been knocked out from under him. And Trump doesn't help because Poilievre has an approach to politics. It's very strong. It's very in your face. And he's often pushing stuff that's a bit harsh, but you can see him setting things up for the next campaign. So as he stood there in the freezing cold, you could tell by his attire, and just trying to tie Mr. Carney to Mr. Trudeau. I'm not sure that works in the minds of a lot of Canadians who say, no, get over it. Trudeau's gone. Carney's a different kettle of fish, and he's somebody with experience at such a high level in so many different things. He's exactly the type of calm, reassuring figure that we need. So the harsher Poilievre gets, if he goes back to his old incarnation, the tougher it's going to be to convince people that he's the person we need to deal with Trump. Now, things could settle down a lot between now and the eventual general election, which I'm pitting is probably mid to late May at this stage. And, things could really change around that. But for now, the Liberals definitely, especially with Mark Carney, when he's factored in, they're doing much better than anybody would have predicted a month ago.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Brian, because in that, if you dig a little deeper on those numbers, those Léger numbers, that it actually has, the Liberals with Justin Trudeau as the leader at 31% versus 40% to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. And then if you compare where Chrystia Freeland would be, because that question was asked as well, she's at 28% to 39% for the Conservatives. So clearly all shifting towards somebody like Mark Carney. So what do you think that does for him in terms of an extra little boost as we continue to march towards March 9th when the Liberals will choose their new leader?
I think even if it weren't with the polls, he has lots of momentum for other reasons within the Liberal leadership race, given the amount of caucus members, cabinet ministers, and just the general sense that his campaign has momentum. And then on top of that, you layer in a poll that is really, really quite favoring him compared to the other leadership candidates. And it's quite striking because normally people would not be aware of leadership candidates. They would have very little awareness. So it's actually quite striking and surprising that somebody that's never held elected office is doing so well in such a poll. So certainly I think any Liberal listening that is a part of this leadership race and thinking about who to vote for will make this one of the considerations that it seems as of right now. As Tom pointed out, though, a month or a few days can be an eternity in politics. But as of right now, he seems like a choice that would be able to go neck and neck with Poilievre. I just want to add a few things, though, to sort of comment on all the personalities. So I don't think at the beginning, Mike, you said that some were analyzing, saying that maybe Poilievre was on his back foot. I don't think that's fair. I mean, look, this is a massive development that nobody controls. We couldn't have predicted that it would be to this extent. We obviously knew Trump would be an irritator, to say the least, but to this extent and frankly going much beyond being simply an irritator. So this is something that is essentially taking up all the airwaves, and then it goes to the government. And it's very difficult. It'd be incredibly difficult for any opposition leader to get any sort of attention during that time. So it's completely normal. And I think to give them some solace, the Conservatives, I'm sure they're saying to themselves, despite the fact that this is such a massive thing that it's an emergency, right? On the levels of other sort of kind of disasters that could hit Canada, they're still ahead in the polls. With Carney, though, it's certainly a dead heat, and you can probably see, as Tom pointed out, you can see Poilievre in the campaign his campaign aware of that, and already trying to get some messaging out there on Carney. And then last but not least, I think for Trudeau, him and some people around him might be saying, oh, we told you, had we stayed and Trump would have done something, we might have had a chance. I think to Lisa's point, some of the numbers are also reflective of the fact that he's going. Even though he's still there, they know that it's sort of on its last legs, and the numbers reflect that as well when Carney is put in as the leader in that hypothetical poll. So all that to say, all the personalities are sort of at the whim right now, politically speaking, to Trump, because that's taking up all the space.
Yeah, and Brian, we do have to shift to Washington in just a second, but I just wanted to say that I think the point that I was trying to make there is that Pierre Poilievre was keenly focused on the Liberals throughout all of this, and even as President Trump started to come after Canada, and then maybe he was a little slower than he would have been otherwise to go after Trump. That's the point that I was making there.
Yeah, and look, I think that's right. I think that's right too. By the way, I mean he's had such success for a year, 2 years on the messaging that he's been using. So obviously, it's going to be maybe a little slower to pivot because you've gotten so much traction, politically speaking, with the messages that you've been using. So I think that's probably normal. And at the end of the day, though, I think the Poilievre team are going to be well aware that they're going to have to start to shift. And Lisa makes a good point, right? To what extent does the carbon tax really remain one of the big things that they can use? They could still use it as that's something you wanted to do. They could try to muddy the waters on whether they would actually really get rid of it. So still some plays you can make there, but maybe not as big as it was before, especially in comparison now to what's happening with the Trump administration.